Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Thursday, October the 10th, 2024. So first of all, thank you very much for all of your support. I've just hit 7,000 subscribers. I know 7,000 subscribers isn't massive, but it's certainly a start. It's better than nothing. And it does seem that slowly but surely the channel is making some progress, although I understand subscribers aren't the only thing that matters. And if you're not subscribed, and if you do enjoy these videos, I would of course always be grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you do like this video, I would be really happy if you were to indicate that, if you were to like it. Now, as far as my main topic is concerned, well, of course, I'm going to be talking about the astrology and I Ching for today, which is Thursday, October the 10th. But I also want to look at some reactions, and that's why I've got this thumbnail. I've got a picture of Obama, and I've written reactions with a question mark. And I just wanted to look at a few people and the odd country and organization and consider what is their reaction going to be when there is this presidential election on November the 5th. So, everyone looks at Kamala Harris's chart, they look at Donald Trump's chart, but what about other people? For example, what does Elon Musk think? What kind of day is it for Elon Musk? What kind of day is it for Taylor Swift? Or maybe Nancy Pelosi? Or, of course, Barack Obama? So I want to consider a few of the people who, famous people who have made their positions clear, perhaps, in terms of who they support, and, ask, what kind of day is November the 5th going to be for them? Because maybe that will help give us some hints about what the result is going to be. Of course, I've already said what I think the result is going to be. I do believe that Trump is going to win, but still, let's look at some other people and see how they respond to November the 5th. Okay, so let's start off by looking at what's happening today. So here is the chart for today, Thursday, New York, set for noon. So what's happening? Yesterday, the moon went into Capricorn. The moon is, of course, still in Capricorn. There you can see moon at 16 Capricorn, midday in New York. So it doesn't matter where you are. It's a moon in Capricorn day. So the moon in Capricorn, it's useful, isn't it? And we have a planet in Earth signs if we count the moon as a planet. Of course, I understand that the moon is a satellite, but still, it gives us some grounding, and it also allows us to think about our security concerns. And with moon in Capricorn, there can often be a sense of material selfishness, but I don't think that's anything we need to feel guilty about. We do have to look after our own interests. Now, this moon in Capricorn, it is making an opposition to Mars. So you've got Mars in Cancer, Moon in Capricorn. Moon-Mars opposition can be a little bit difficult. It's a time when we're perhaps aware of how our interests conflict with another person's interests, and it can make some of us annoyed. Some people more than other people, but there can be annoyances. Things make us angry. Now, we may not always express this anger, but it might still be there. And, that can work in several ways. It can be us getting annoyed, or it can be other people getting annoyed with us. So how we deal with that, depends on where we stand. We could perhaps make a special effort to be tolerant and patient and to put up with other people's mistakes. But maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we need to express our annoyance. On the other hand, we have to consider our own behavior. If we are in the habit of making other people annoyed, as can happen, then perhaps we should make a special effort to behave well, behave nicely, do what we're told, not be too controversial. So that Moon-Mars opposition, I'm not saying it's I'm not saying it's an amazing thing. I mean, you get a Moon-Mars opposition every month, so it's not a huge deal. And at the same time, we have got the Moon making a sextile to Saturn, and it may be that that Moon sextile Saturn is a sort of an antidote to the Moon opposition Mars. Although what happens is we get the Moon sextile Saturn first, then the Moon opposition Mars. So Moon sextile Saturn can be about stabilization, things being under control. So, Moon in Capricorn, all things being equal, is not the most emotional place sign for the Moon to be in. And if you give it a square to Saturn, that allows a certain emotional control. So it may be, if you've got Moon sextile Saturn before the Moon opposition Mars, we can perhaps sort of prime ourselves. We can develop the disciplined approach that is required to deal with challenges later in the day, particularly emotional challenges. So that may be one way of looking at it. An alternative view may be that we try our very hardest to keep things under control, but there just comes a point when it's just too much, when we just absolutely have to say something or do something. Now, the Moon is making a square to the Sun. So there's the Sun at 1718 Libra. There's the Moon at 16 Capricorn. And that means that it is a first quarter moon. So we had a new moon right at the beginning of the month, new lunar cycle, and now that lunar cycle is developing. We have now this first crisis, and of course I mean crisis not necessarily in a negative sense. It's just where we start to really understand what this new lunar cycle actually is all about. And in a way, it's I won't say the peak of a lunar cycle, because obviously the peak is at the full moon, but it's where the development of the lunar cycle really starts to reach its best phase, because soon the moon will be trine the sun, and so we now know what it's all about. So that is certainly something we need to think about, that it is a first quarter moon. Now, as far as other things going on, well, it's not a particularly spectacular day, astrologically. Though one thing one might want to consider is the position of Venus. So here's Venus. Venus is at 21 Scorpio. And Venus is making a quincunx to Chiron. And it's also making a quincunx to Jupiter. So this is perhaps quite an important configuration. I think they call it a yod. And a yod is when you have got an opposition. Not an opposition. You've got, let's get this right, you've got a sextile and two quincunxes. So there you have Jupiter sextile Chiron, and then you have got Venus making a quincunx to Chiron and a quincunx to Jupiter. And that means, of course, that Venus is on the Jupiter-Chiron midpoint. So let's try to unpack this. So Jupiter-Chiron sextile. I've got a Jupiter-Chiron conjunction in my horoscope, so maybe I'm sensitive to a very close Jupiter-Chiron conjunction, so maybe I'm sensitive to the Jupiter-Chiron cycle. But Jupiter-Chiron sextile is, I think, fairly spiritual, and I think it's about what we can do to make the world a better place. I think that there is something that can definitely be done here, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we just have to follow the line. In fact, in order to make the world a better place with Jupiter sextile Chiron, we may have to do something differently, and we may have to put ourselves in a position where we maybe vulnerable ourselves to being wounded, perhaps through criticism. But we have to have perhaps the vision. Jupiter is a planet that is about vision. We have to have a vision to think about what we can do to, okay, we may not be able to make the whole world a better place, but we may be able to help certain people. And in general, I think that we can express our individuality, but we're not expressing our individuality just out of ego. We're expressing our individuality because we need to do it in order to have the best possible impact on other people, to be able to help other people in whatever way we can. Now, we've got Venus making a quincunx to Jupiter, Venus making a quincunx to Chiron. So Venus quincunx Chiron does indicate a general uncomfortableness with other people. Just a feeling that we're on a different wavelength, and we may be worried about other people's priorities, or maybe other people are going to be worried about our priorities. But with Venus on the Chiron-Jupiter midpoint, I think that it is a time when we can relate very powerfully. And in terms of how we relate to people, we must always think about what we can do. It's all about, I suppose, thinking about how we can be useful. Useful kind of sounds too trivial, and making a difference sounds a bit too trite. But what we can do to be helpful, what we can do perhaps to heal wounds, what is our responsibility here? And Venus in Scorpio is a placement which is very deep, quite emotional, and it's very sincere. And so we need to do whatever we can to sincerely interact with people at their level and perhaps make them feel better. Though, that's the overall midpoint. Although, if you break it up, you've got Venus quincunx Chiron, Venus quincunx Jupiter. Venus quincunx Chiron is perhaps saying that in order to be useful, we have to make ourselves feel somewhat uncomfortable. It's not just about making ourselves available and everyone thinks we're wonderful. Very often if we try to help someone, we get resistance and there is suspicion. So that might be Venus quincunx Chiron. And then you've got Venus quincunx Jupiter. We just feel that there is something to do or something that needs to be done, but Venus quincunx Jupiter can be a little bit overindulgent. Whenever you see Venus-Jupiter pairings, you have to think potentially about overindulgence, because we know we're supposed to be bringing Venus and Jupiter together, but it can be hard work. And so we might just respond in a worst case scenario in a way that is quite sort of sloppy. We feel, oh, well, what are we going to do? It's too complicated. Well, I'll spend some money or I'll buy an expensive meal or I'll go to a party. But, that might be a way to deal with Venus quincunx Jupiter on a level which I suppose is quite crude and is not really very useful. In fact, could be quite destructive. So do consider this yod involving these two quincunxes, Venus quincunx Chiron, Venus quincunx Jupiter, and the fact that Venus is on the Jupiter Chiron midpoint. Now, just turning to the picture for Sydney, Australia, just to give an alternative view, because Sydney and New York are a long way apart in terms of time zones. So New York, we had the moon at noon at 16 Capricorn, and if we go to Sydney, Australia, the moon is back at 8 Capricorn. So there's a slightly different picture there. I think that if you are in Australia or New Zealand, remember I talked about the Moon-Mars opposition, and I suggested that the Moon-Mars opposition might be a bit of a problem. I think if you're in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia, then I don't think that Moon Mars opposition is such a big issue today. Okay, you might experience it sort of towards the end of the day and into tomorrow, but I don't think it's going to be quite so important. Though that Venus quincunx Jupiter, Venus quincunx Chiron, I would have said it's still very much there. You might not feel it quite as strongly as if you were in the Americas or in Europe, but you can still see that Venus is applying to a quincunx of Jupiter, Venus is applying to a quincunx of Chiron, but you may not get the full impact of that Venus Chiron Jupiter aspect until perhaps later in the day or perhaps into tomorrow. But don't worry, I mean, you're still going to get it. It's still there. It's still very much around. So let me now look at the heliocentric viewpoint. So here are the positions of the planets if we put the Earth at the center of the solar system. So there we have it. So as usual, just pointing out that Mars is getting closer and closer to Jupiter. Not there yet. We're now 2.5 degrees apart. So that Mars-Jupiter conjunction is quite high energy. That's true. And I suppose we're starting to feel it. So that's certainly true. And Venus is in, well, heliocentrically it's in Capricorn, but Venus is actually making a quincunx to Jupiter heliocentrically as well as geocentrically. So it's perhaps a super important aspect, this Venus quincunx Jupiter, because we're getting it at all levels, geocentrically and heliocentrically. So we must really start to think about its meaning. And as I was saying when I was describing the Venus quincunx Jupiter from a geocentric perspective, it can be about overindulgence. And the reason we're going to be overindulging ourselves, or the reason we could overindulge ourselves, is because we don't know how to respond. We are responding to an input, and that input, might be this feeling, but there's something we're supposed to be doing. There's something we're supposed to be doing to make the world happier, to make us happier. And we perhaps don't have the imagination or the sense of self-discipline to actually make it happen in an organic way. So we just throw money at the problem. And that is not the right approach to this Venus quincunx Jupiter. And in fact, from a heliocentric perspective, we actually have another yod, because look at Mercury and Venus. Mercury and Venus are in sextile, and Mercury and Venus are moving towards a quincunx with Jupiter. So heliocentrically, we effectively have a yod. Because we've got two quincunxes here, Venus quincunx Jupiter, Mercury quincunx Jupiter. Then we have got the sextile there between Mercury and Venus. And so with that Mercury-Venus sextile, I think that heliocentrically, it's quite high level. And that means that we may not have access to it. But when I say high level, it's sort of quite cosmic. But it's perhaps about the cosmic creativity, being able to create something which is of lasting value, which is a reflection of what is happening out there in the universe. Now, not all of us are going to be able to tune into it, though perhaps we can try. Try to ask ourselves, what is the universe trying to tell us? And certainly if you're an artist, there is something trying to make itself felt. I mean, an artist, you could be a musician, a writer, a singer, a sculptor. There's something there. Something is trying to make itself felt, and it can be picked up on with that Mercury sextile Venus. And once we tune into that with that Mercury sextile Venus heliocentrically, I think we can express it, and I think that the world will very much appreciate it if we can just get it out into the open, especially as Jupiter is going to be on the Mercury-Venus midpoint. I mean, Jupiter on the Mercury-Venus midpoint is something that is really very talented, that we really can express ourselves in a sort of a free-flowing way and be in tune with something which is above and beyond our everyday existence. So that is certainly interesting. So let me now look at today from the viewpoint of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for today, which is Thursday, October the 10th, 2024. Aries. Aries, the moon continues to move through Capricorn, and so I think that you do get a sense of having to do something. It's important, and it won't wait. You are concerned, though, that perhaps you don't have sufficient resources to see it through. And then you have to ask yourself, what actually do you mean by resources? And resources, it's not just about money or getting support from other people. It could be about emotional resources or just resources in terms of enthusiasm. I think that can be an Aries thing. Asking yourself, do you have enough enthusiasm to actually see it through to completion? And Aries, you might have a few doubts, but if you can just plow on in a solid way, then I think that in the end things will start coming together. Now, the moon does make an opposition to Mars, and for you, I think that could be quite an important aspect. Now, Aries does have a reputation as being an angry sign. I'm not saying that's true, by the way. I mean, Aries anger is very fleeting. Aries can get very angry one moment, then it just passes. It's not like Taurean or Scorpio anger that can just go on and on and on. Aries express their annoyance, then they just move on. So that's perhaps how we should perhaps see that moon opposition Mars. Something makes you annoyed. Something bothers you. Something irritates you. It could be about a disturbance. You're doing something. You're kind of comfortable doing what you're doing. I mean, you're not that comfortable, but someone bothers you or asks you a question and demands your attention, and you just might sort of lash out almost without thinking. It's quite an emotional response. So do try to be a little patient with other people. Some people just don't really understand your boundaries. They don't understand what you're doing, why it's important, and it's enough just to tell someone you're busy or to tell them you can't be bothered with them right now. You don't have to get angry. So patience and tolerance could be important. And also, Aries, do be a little bit careful with your language. And I think there is some danger that perhaps when you're annoyed that you use language which is somewhat intemperate, or you might use words which could be offensive. Words can be offensive. They might even be a bit crude, and you didn't really mean to say it, but it just happens. So Aries, I do think a bit of self-discipline could be quite important. Now, with this Moon-Mars opposition, there may be a certain emphasis on the the home-work balance. If you're working, if you are engaged in a job or a business, you may be aware of a certain conflict there, that you've got the demands of, for example, employers or clients or business or whatever, and then you've got the demands of your home and family. And I think you could just feel that there is a certain clash between those demands, between those demands and actually what you want to do. And that may actually be intensified by the fact that we have a first quarter moon. In fact, in the jargon, we've got a T-square. I mean, a T-square is when you've got an opposition. I mean, you've got another planet making a square to it. So you could say, there's the sun the sun is making a square to Mars, sort of. In a couple of days' time, the sun will be square Mars, and the moon is making a square to the sun and opposition Mars. So that T-square could be a little bit angry. And with this first quarter moon, which I do think you could really pick up on this first quarter moon, the first quarter moon is perhaps you knowing that there's something you've got to do, and perhaps you've been feeling this since a new moon at the beginning of a month. And then there is this feeling of, hold on, is anything happening? Is this good enough? And there might be moments of worry and concern that, hold on, something has to happen. And it may be that with the first quarter moon, your sense of urgency actually could be quite useful. You perhaps just realize that now's the time to just move things along, and to perhaps deal with a challenge, because you know what the challenge is, you know what is holding you back, and you deal with it, and all of a sudden things do start to move. And you've got to be persistent, because just remember, there are no planets in fire signs, so you can't just rely on that Aries free-flowing inspiration, that kind of thing. You have to really look at what your resources are. And I suggested right at the beginning of this piece that maybe some Arians feel they don't have enough resources, but you can use things in different ways, and simply by focusing on something, focusing on what needs to be done, not worrying too much if you feel a bit down about it, if you don't feel it's going anywhere, but you just keep moving, and then in the end, I think that you will make good progress. Taurus, the moon continues to move through Capricorn, and I think that is nice. From a Taurian perspective, Capricorn is a sign which is very imaginative, and it's able to sort of look at things from different perspectives, but imaginative not in a sort of pie in the sky kind of way, just looking at what is in front of you, and then using your common sense to work out how it can actually be utilized. So it's not enough to just have an idea. You have to take an idea, work out what's practical about that idea, and then turn it into something that is very real. Now, today, as I've been saying, as I was saying in the introduction to this video, Venus, which is your ruler, is in some respects very powerfully configured by a quincunx to Jupiter and a quincunx to Chiron. And a quincunx in astrology, it's a 150-degree aspect. It's, I would have said, a minor aspect. It's in itself not so important, but when it is exact, when it is part of a larger configuration, then I think that quincunx does become important. So in terms of what that Venus, well, let's start off with Venus quincunx Jupiter. What does that mean? Venus quincunx Jupiter means, Taurus, that you feel perhaps that you want more. Whatever more is, it kind of depends on you, doesn't it? Taurus perhaps has a reputation for being a somewhat indulgent sign. I mean, that's one view of Taurus, that Taurians, every Taurian has a guilty pleasure, whatever it might be. I mean, It might be food, it might be chocolate, it might be art, whatever it is. In fact, every healthy Taurian should have a guilty pleasure. If you've got a Taurian who doesn't have a guilty pleasure, then that might be cause for concern. You think of someone like Hitler. I mean, I don't think Hitler had any guilty pleasures. And so, or Maximilian Robespierre, or Pol Pot, those kind of Taurians, they don't have guilty pleasures, and that they are they're complete monsters, I suppose. So the real totalitarian Taurians don't have guilty pleasures. So every Taurian probably needs a guilty pleasure, and if they don't have a guilty pleasure, that is certainly cause for concern. And so, with Venus quincunx Jupiter, you feel that there's something you need to do. You want more of something, and it's difficult to get more of something. And you might then look for shortcuts. And shortcuts could be about a piece of indulgence that's absolutely unnecessary. So you feel something has to happen and it can't happen, and then you just go and eat something, or you drink something, or you spend some money. This is, I believe, an inappropriate way of dealing with the Venus quincunx Jupiter. So today, if you find yourself spending money that you weren't planning on spending, something looks nice, it might make you feel good, whatever, then I suspect that something is wrong. That Venus quincunx Jupiter needs some work, and you need to find a way to move beyond yourself in a way that is organic and can't just be paid for. And so that's one way of looking at Venus quincunx Jupiter. It's not an impossibility. Venus quincunx Jupiter, it's a quincunx. So this quincunx is not like an opposition or a square. As the first person in my astrology teacher, this man called Ron Gwynn, I did his a certificate at the Faculty of Astrological Studies, and he described quincunxes, and Ron Gwynn, I believe, was a surveyor. That was his day job, and he described the Venus quincunx Jupiter as like a pipe that is bent in a strange way. And the question is, what do you, or something like a pipe? And he says, what do you do with this pipe when there's some place for this pipe, but you can't fit it in. It doesn't seem to go anywhere. And he was saying that the challenge of a quincunx is to find a place for this pipe, and you can find this place for this pipe. So with this Venus quincunx Jupiter, this is what you're looking for, and you can find the place. It might require some work, but you can certainly do it. And this Venus is also quincunx Chiron, and Venus is on the Chiron Jupiter midpoint. So with Venus on the Chiron Jupiter midpoint, that does mean that there seems to be something you really have to do. And I would have thought with Jupiter Chiron, it may be about you doing something that is different, because Chiron can be the maverick, and something that is a fundamental expression of yourself, and at the same time, it helps humanity. And in some ways, if Chiron is a wounded healer, it helps humanity's wounds. And that's something you can do. Okay, not necessarily humanity's wounds. It may be one other person is a bit wounded, feeling sorry for themselves or whatever. There's definitely something you can do. And so, really work on it. And I don't really think there's anything more to be said today. I think you do have work to do, and it's not going to be easy, because you're going to need to use your imagination, and you're going to have to ask yourself who you are and what you're supposed to be doing. Gemini, you have quite a strong sense of yourself, and who you are. And also, Gemini, I think you have a strong sense of your own power. You are quite powerfully placed, even though it doesn't feel like it. And perhaps you don't know how powerful you are until you try, until you make an effort to assert yourself, to make things happen. And as soon as you start to make things happen, you should find that very quickly things really start to move. And I think that the reason this is happening is you have to look at actually what's going on astrologically. So Mercury is square Mars. It's very widely square Mars. It's 5 degrees off. And Mercury is also square Pluto, but it's quite wide. It's off. But the thing is that Mercury is on the Mars-Pluto midpoint. So Mercury is moving from one square, the square to Mars, to another square, which is the square to Pluto. So Mercury on the Mars-Pluto midpoint. And that's what gives you your strength. And it gives you a great sense of focus. Now, if you are a typical Gemini, focus can be quite difficult. And, I'm speaking as a typical Gemini, I suppose, maybe. I do find focus quite difficult. The only way I can be focused is to be somewhat obsessed. And I find it difficult to focus on, more than one thing at a time. I'm not actually as a Gemini, I'm very bad at multitasking. But, which I'm not supposed to be. If you're a Gemini, you're supposed to be good at multitasking, but I don't think I'm particularly good at it. But anyway, focus matters. And I suppose there needs to be a certain obsessive quality about it, because focus by definition can't be mixed. You can't be focusing on several things at once, because then that's not focus, is it? So decide what is important and then give it everything you have got. And I think that you will be helped by the fact that the moon is in Capricorn. The moon in Capricorn, yeah, it's an energy that Gemini don't feel very comfortable with, moon in Capricorn, but still, moon in Capricorn is perhaps forcing you to do things differently. It's forcing you to be more serious, to be more intense. And I think that in this way you can really do something really special, really useful. And I'm not promising, though, that it's going to be fun. You can't expect everything to be fun. It can still be connected with who you are and what makes you wonderfully creative, but it's not fun. It's because it's too serious to be fun. So, Gemini, I think my general advice today would really be to consider what matters, what really matters. And I suppose we can't avoid the fact that Mercury can be connected with communication, and it may be with Mercury on the Mars-Pluto midpoint, but you just feel that there's something that needs to be said. And if you're in a situation where you want to say something and you can't say something, there's perhaps someone you need to say something to and you can't say anything to them for some reason, then, well, that says quite a lot about your relationship with another person. Perhaps that's a real test, isn't it? In terms of relationships. Are you able to be open and honest with them? Even when you feel under pressure, even when you're obsessed about something, can you be open and honest with someone? And of course, if you can be open and honest with someone and not be too worried about their feedback, remember the Moon-Mars opposition today, Moon-Mars opposition can be quite difficult, can be quite angry. do you have that level of trust? And perhaps that's a good way of gauging someone, and whether or not there's someone you want to have around. Can you demonstrate your intensity to them? If you can, that's great. If you can't, then maybe that person isn't right for you, or that person is not going to be able to play a central role in your life. So that is something to think about. Can you be open and honest? That is perhaps an important question for you. Cancer. So Cancer, we have the moon moving through your opposite sign, Capricorn, and the moon is making an opposition to Mars. And this Moon-Mars opposition, it could be a little bit stressful. I mean, because, there is a Moon-Mars opposition across, the main axis of your chart, Mars in Cancer, Moon in Capricorn. And as a result of this aspect, you might feel a little bit angry. There are certainly things that could annoy you. There are things that are not perfect. And I think that you may be quite quick to express your annoyance. I mean, after all, Mars is moving through Cancer. Moon is opposition Mars. Moon is you, because Moon obviously is a ruler of Mars. Sorry, Moon is ruler of Cancer. So Moon is you. It's opposition Mars. So we do perhaps get the picture of you perhaps getting annoyed about something. And it may be that as far as tolerance and patience is concerned, maybe you're not as tolerant and patient as you usually are. But before expressing your irritation, do think about it. Is it something that you actually need to do? And also today, the moon is square the sun. So that is a reminder that it is the first quarter moon. And as far as you're concerned, this may be a point of minor decision. There is a new tide of affairs. I mean, relatively new, because we had a new moon at the beginning of the month. But now we've got the first quarter moon. Things have reached a point where maybe something needs to happen. You're not entirely comfortable with it, and you can see the way things are going. And if things keep going in the way they have been going, you might be worried that they might not get anywhere. And it may just be a time where you have to take a stand, because now you can see everything. Now everything is clear, first quarter moon. You're able to see how things could go, how they could go very well, how they could go very badly. And perhaps now is a time when you need to make a decision, because if you don't make a decision, and if you just let things continue on their merry way, then things might dissipate. It might all be a waste. Things might just get absolutely nowhere. So now might be a time when you do have to consider what is the best way of reacting, and you have to ask who is useful and perhaps who is not useful. And in that light, we do have a sextile between the moon and Saturn, and that moon-Saturn sextile, I think, is a useful aspect, and it perhaps can help you prepare. And in terms of preparation, it may be deciding what you need. What do you need in order to move from one stage to the next? What do you need to take advantage of the first quarter moon in order to basically not just understand what's going on, but how to sort of harness the overall energy? What do you need? And so moon sextile Saturn is very practical. It's moon in Capricorn sextile Saturn, so that's especially practical because the moon is in Capricorn. And you should perhaps be considering other people, which people are going to be useful. And I think you can start to make a decision in that direction. And in terms of relationships, Moon sextile Saturn is a very nice aspect. I mean, it's not a particularly strong aspect and it's not an infrequent aspect, but while it's around, I think that you and someone else can understand each other. And in fact, if there is a person who you feel you might fall out with if you're not careful, or you can see the possibility of an argument, but it's the kind of person you want to have around, then that Moon sextile Saturn may be an opportunity to argument-proof a relationship, to kind of look at where the conflict might happen before it happens, and then you can do something to make sure that the problem never occurs. So, in terms of relationships, try to think about what might be about to happen, say in, 12 hours' time, and think about what you can do now to prevent a problem happening the next day, or even earlier, I said like 12 hours. So I think there is something you can do to stabilize the various relationships you're involved in. Leo, in some respects, you are taking yourself quite seriously at the moment. You believe that there is important work to do, and I think that you are very aware of your limitations, not just your limitations, but the limitations of the society in which you live, or the government in which you function under. All of us live under different governments, and one has to follow the rules to an extent, I suppose. Well, one must always follow the rules, but you're very aware of that. And I think, Leo, you're very aware of what you can do and what you can't do. And this might mean that you are actually a useful person to have around. You can actually be very sensible. And I know that the word sensible is not something you normally apply to Leo. I'm not saying that Leos are not sensible people, but it's not like you really emphasize, Leo. Leo is the most sensible of the 12 signs. Well, that's not what you normally read, is it? But today, I think Leos are sensible. They have a very good sense of their limitations, and they also understand what is required, what needs to be done. And if you look back, over the last week or so, since the beginning of the month when we had a new moon, so there was a new moon, and it was a sort of symbolic new beginning. I mean, when was that new moon? I think it was October the 2nd, I think? Yeah, October the 2nd, there was a new moon, sort of beginning of the month. So, new month, okay, it's now what? It's now October the 10th. And so, things are moving. And soon enough, I suppose the month will be gone. And I suppose you're thinking about, hold on, what do you need to do? What were your plans at the beginning of a month, and to what extent are you actually accomplishing them? I mean, you've made some progress, but your progress is not perfect, and you can see where you've gone wrong, you can see what's missing, and I think that with this first quarter moon, that is something that you're really very aware of, and I think that it's something that you're going to want to perhaps address immediately. It just needs to be done straight away, and you'll expect things to run smoothly. Will things run smoothly? Not always, because today there is an opposition between the Moon and Mars, and I do think that there are going to be things happening which you find irritating. I think you may sense a certain lack of respect, that it will feel that people are behaving in a way that doesn't seem to really respect your needs. I mean, it's not dramatic, but you're trying to basically keep things under control, and it just may be that some people are just making things worse, and they're creating needless disturbances, needless chaos, and that's just something you don't need. And the question is, what do you do? I think that there is a temptation, a danger that you get angry, and somehow you have to express your needs, express your requirements in a way that doesn't create a major conflict. But I think this is something you actually can do. And I think the key thing is, if you are having problems from other people, and you feel you need to say something, is don't make it personal. You can talk about things in a more sort of impersonal way, rather than using, you. Say, one can do it like this. One should do it like this. This is the way it needs to be done, and you need to have a good understanding of the way this thing works. And so, if you can explain things in a sort of a fairly rational way, and perhaps demonstrate that you understand the rules and that your understanding of the rules is superior, I think people will basically get the message. And I just don't think you have to personalize things. And so overall, Leo, if you're disciplined and you keep calm, then I think it's a day when I think things overall should work pretty well for you. But I'm not promising it's going to be an exciting day. I don't think there's actually any evidence that it's going to be an exciting day. I'm not saying it won't be an exciting day, but if there is some excitement, well, actually, do you want it to be an exciting day? I expect not. I think, Leo, you're just going to want everything to run as planned. Virgo, you are, I think, in a reasonable position here. I believe, Virgo, that you have a lot of things available to you, and also, Virgo, you have a certain strength of character, and I think that this strength of character is going to just really help see you through. It's going to make sure that you are seen and you are heard and you are respected. And this strength of character is I suppose it's about being clear who you are and who you're not, and making it also clear what your expectations are. Because, Virgo, I think you do have quite high expectations, both of yourself and of other people, and you have, I think, a certain strength of purpose. You know that you can make things happen. At least I hope you know you can make things happen. And so if you have any doubts, if you feel that you don't have any freedom, that you can't make things happen, you feel a certain sense of perhaps weakness, or that other people are in a stronger position than you, I would suggest that you're mistaken, because actually you are in a really good position. Now, the reason you're in a good position, I was explaining this to Gemini, and because Gemini, like Virgo, has Mercury as its ruler, and the reason is, if you actually look at the position of Mercury, Mercury is making a very wide square to Mars, 5 degrees orb, and it's making a very wide square to Pluto. I mean, I don't normally count 5 degrees, that's too wide for a square, but the point is that Mercury, which is your ruler, is halfway between one square and another square. And that means we can say that Mercury is on the Mars-Pluto midpoint. And that is giving us the suggestion that you, Virgo, are very able to make things happen, and you're very insistent. And once you've decided that something is important, you're just going to keep going. And you will keep going until you achieve it. And in fact, Virgo, you can be quite ruthless today. Now, ruthless, if you're ruthless, okay, the word ruthless has certain connotations of cruelty and selfishness, but ruthless needn't always be a bad thing. It's about deciding that, something really has to be done. It's important. And I suppose the means justify the end. Then I suppose you can always get into, what do they say? You can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. You don't want to go that far. But once you get going, once you decide that something is important, then, really nothing can stop you. And this can apply to, all areas of your life, but there might well be a financial dimension here because Mercury, your ruler, is in Libra, and Libra is in the sign following Virgo. Libra is a sign from a Virgo perspective which is connected with money and resources. So Virgo, if you feel that there's something that you want, perhaps of a material nature, maybe it's just a sum of money, I don't know, then you can use the power of your personality to give yourself the absolute best chance of getting it, though you do need a sense of proportion. It's all very well to say the means justify the end, but do they? I mean, obviously you don't want to go so far that you upset someone or you come over as being money grabbing, and that's obviously not what we want. Of course, I understand, Virgo, that money may be of no interest to you, but I'm just making this as a subsection of my Virgo reading for those of you that do regard money as important right now, whether it is a financial issue, whether it's money that's owed to you, or you feel you need money or you need extra money. It's just a reminder that with focus you can get something that you may feel is owed to you. So if that's the case, I think that is okay, provided you have some respect for other people and their feelings. And at the same time, Virgo, I think that you're able to look at what you can do, and you can look at your many abilities, and you can really make the most of them. And I don't think that you should try too hard to compromise, particularly over creativity. Creativity cannot be compromised. If you're doing something and you feel that it's absolutely right, and someone tells you it's not absolutely right, and someone tells you to change it, then that's not going to make you happy. And I think, at least for today, you shouldn't be too overwhelmed by creative criticism. Yeah, you might receive criticism, or you might get feedback you're not happy about, but I think that you can take it in your stride. I don't think you necessarily have to change anything. Always listen to other people, see what they've got to say, but just because someone says something doesn't mean you have to take it on board, doesn't mean that you actually have to do what they say. I mean, far from it. So in general, Virgo, it's a day when you are strong, when you may even be deceptively strong, when actually some people might completely underestimate you. Libra, today there is a certain temptation to just turn your back on the world. Do you really need the world? You've got your own things to do, and maybe you just want to do absolutely nothing. That's certainly a possibility, but I'm not entirely convinced that that is the right approach. Yeah, you might be thinking that you have to look after your own interests, and that is the right thing to do. But there are other things going on, and I'm thinking particularly of what's happening to Venus. Of course, Venus is the ruler of Libra. And so Venus is part of this really quite powerful configuration. I think it's called a yod, and I don't really spend too much time thinking about yods as a configuration, but it does matter for you. And so what a yod is, as I was saying at the beginning of this video, a yod is two quincunxes and a sextile. So here is, Venus, your Venus is quincunx Jupiter, your Venus is quincunx Chiron, and so your Venus is right between Venus and Chiron. Your Venus is being challenged. That means you're being challenged. And with Venus quincunx Jupiter, I think perhaps part of the challenge might be to move beyond yourself. Venus is in Scorpio. I think that Venus in Scorpio is having an influence on you. Perhaps with Venus in Scorpio, you've been taking things more seriously than usual, and you felt that you had to take action, perhaps to protect yourself, to avoid anything that is particularly difficult. Yet Venus quincunx Jupiter is challenging you. You've got to go beyond. You've got to look at things from a different perspective, and you've got to open your eyes and start to see things which in the past you'd either missed, or perhaps you'd seen them but you'd just convinced yourself you didn't need to bother with them. And so what actually are you being asked to do? I mean, you're being asked to do something, and I suppose you could say, well, it's not for me to tell you what you should be doing, what you are being asked to do. That is a matter, how should we say it? That's a matter between you and, how do you want to see it? You and your higher self, perhaps. I know it's difficult to think in terms of people communicating with their higher selves, and of course that's one sort of spiritual way of looking at things. But it's perhaps also about your conscience and thinking about what are you actually meant to be doing. And I just think there seems to be one area where you are sort of looking away, and I think the Venus quincunx Jupiter is challenging you. And Venus is also quincunx Chiron, and the challenge with Venus quincunx Chiron is possibly to stand out. Chiron is the maverick. It wants to do things differently. Venus quincunx Chiron, you as a Libra, Venus, you don't want to rock the boat, but Chiron is perhaps saying, oh, maybe you have to rock the boat. And so when we put it all together, Venus quincunx Chiron, Venus quincunx Jupiter, Jupiter sextile Chiron, Venus on the Jupiter-Chiron midpoint, when you put that all together, it does seem, Libra, that there is something today that you have to do which is very important. I mean, okay, it may be more, maybe about tomorrow as well, if you're in Australia or New Zealand. It's just something that you need to do. And it's possibly about helping people, or not helping people in just some general sense. It becomes like not like your karmic volunteer hours. It's not quite like that, is it? It's something that is about you, and you need to do it, and you know what it is, and you know that you've got the ability, and you know you've got the resources, but nonetheless you still want to look away. But it's for you. And I suppose you might say it's a bit like Jonah, isn't it? I mean, Jonah was if you remember the story in the Old Testament, Jonah was supposed to go to Nineveh to preach or save the people of Nineveh. I mean, I can't remember precisely what it says in the Bible, but he was supposed to do it. And he didn't want to do it, and so he was on a boat, and so there was a storm, and he got eaten by a whale and taken to Nineveh. So you can't avoid it, and I think that's perhaps one of the messages of the story of Jonah, that if there's something you're supposed to do, you've got to do it, and you can look away. I mean, it might be difficult, but if there's something that needs to be done, then it's got to be done. And it's not just about, you feel, oh, moon is in Capricorn, therefore you should just mind your own business and avoid anything that's complicated. But I think it's good. I mean, it means you're important. It means that you are significant. You are in a position where you can play a significant role, and it's not just some general role. It's something that is very specific to you. As I said, it's not like just karmic volunteer hours, just helping anything, just do whatever it takes, do whatever it needed to take the credit. It doesn't matter. It's something that is special to you, and if you can find what that thing is, which is special to you, and that's all connected, I think, with that yod involving Venus, Chiron, and Jupiter, you'll be doing the right thing. And what more can anyone ask? Scorpio, do be a little bit careful about what you say, and indeed perhaps what you think, because at the moment, Scorpio, there may be a certain temptation to say things which don't necessarily go down well, and I think there's a danger that you use words that could be quite offensive. I mean, it may not just be individual words, it may just be what you are talking about and what you put your energy into talking about, and you just say things and other people's reaction may not be great, and it may be that you start to talk about topics which maybe shouldn't be talked about in polite society, or that may be the way your mind is going, what you're thinking about. You're not just thinking about nice things today. I think a lot of what you're thinking about is quite dark, and it probably has to be thought about, maybe. I mean, this is the nature of being a Scorpio. Scorpios don't like to exist on the surface. They like to understand what's happening deep down, and trying to understand people's motivations, even if those motivations are really unpleasant. And that's a level on which you can work. Now, not everyone, as I suggest, not everyone is going to be comfortable with that, and it just may be that you have to, in some ways, just accept the situation and perhaps accept the limitations being placed upon you. So some things perhaps are best kept to yourself. And I think also you're going to today have, I suspect, a certain intolerance of things that you regard as being unimportant. Scorpios can take themselves seriously. There are things that are important, and there are some things that are important, and there are other things that are completely unimportant, at least in from your perspective. And if people are talking about stuff or making suggestions about things that you regard as being unimportant, beneath you, then I think that you're going to be fairly impatient with it. And so you may almost lose your temper with people who are talking nonsense, or who've got their priorities wrong. And I'm not sure if that's a good thing. I think you perhaps have to understand that not everyone has the same priorities as you. Some people might be seeing things, I don't like to use this word, but in a way that seems to you to be somewhat unevolved. I know it's a terrible word, unevolved. and it sort of, it's quite elitist, some people being more evolved from others, but Scorpio, maybe today you can regard yourself as being more evolved from other people, even if you're not. But today, perhaps that's how you should feel about it. And, some people just don't understand, they don't get it, and you get it, you understand it, and you should just show some tolerance, show some, noblesse oblige. With nobility comes a responsibility to understand other people's weaknesses and to kind of oblige them, or at least to humor them. So that, Scorpio, is something perhaps you should do, and just don't get annoyed with things that just do seem beneath you. But there are always limits. There are things you feel are important, there are things you want to do, and if other people just start talking nonsense, trying to get you to do stuff which is unnecessary, there could be a sense of justified irritation. And so, Scorpio, you have to find a way of creating a distance between yourself and other people, particularly if those other people are trying to drag you down, are trying to waste your time with irrelevant nonsense. You have to create a bit of distance, but without getting too angry about it. And I think that is something you can do. I'm not saying it's going to be completely easy, and it's just very important that when interacting with people you don't respect, that you just use the right language. And as I said at the beginning of this piece on Scorpio, there's just some danger that you use the wrong language and you use words that you later regret. But I think if you show a bit of self-discipline, then I don't think that that will be a problem. Because also, Scorpio, I think that your verbal skills are actually quite good today, and you are going to be able to structure what you say. And if you make the effort, because if you don't make the effort, you can say things which are really hurtful or offensive or just using bad language. I think that is certainly possible if you don't make the effort. But if you do make the effort, then I think that you can keep the whole thing together. You can use the right words and use the right approach. For different people respond to different words, and I think if you use your Scorpio sensitivity, then I think you can get the balance right. You can assert yourself without necessarily being rude. So I think that is something that you can do. Sagittarius, it's a day when we have a sextile between Jupiter and Chiron. And okay, this Jupiter-Chiron sextile, it may not just be about today, because we have to remember that Jupiter is stationary retrograde. I mean, okay, it went retrograde yesterday, but it's still pretty much there. It's absolutely not moving, and this sextile is 4 arc minutes away from Chiron, and so this Jupiter-Chiron sextile is going to be around, I suppose, for a little bit of time. But today it's perhaps especially important because of Venus. So Venus is quincunx Jupiter, Venus is quincunx Chiron. So Venus really brings together that Jupiter-Chiron sextile. So let's think about what that Jupiter-Chiron sextile might actually mean for you. So I think with Jupiter-Chiron, it's perhaps about you and what you can do and how you can help. And that is a question. How can you help? It's not always easy to help, and you may feel that you don't know where you're needed. But I think if you're honest with yourself, Sagittarius, there seems to be an area where you can be very useful, where you are needed. You're not needed everywhere, but there's just one place that I think really where your presence is required, and I think that you can actually make a big difference. And this is intensified by the fact that Venus is quincunx Jupiter. So this Venus quincunx Jupiter is, again, I think that is an important aspect, not least because Jupiter is also sextile Chiron. And so Venus may represent a situation which is not immediately obvious. It's kind of a hidden situation. And you might take the view out of sight, out of mind. If you can't see it, then that's not your responsibility if you don't see it. But is that ever a valid defense? Saying, well, I didn't see it, so how could I do anything about it? I mean, it is a standard defense. It's a defense I use, if I'm accused of not doing something about something, I'll just say, well, I didn't see it. If I'd seen it, I would have done something about it, but I didn't see it. But actually, that's not a valid defense. And at least in this situation, it's not a valid defense. And if you open your eyes, you become aware of things, and you become aware of where you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to be doing. And when I say supposed, I'm not talking about anything sort of vague. I'm talking about something quite deep. We're always supposed to be doing something at a particular time, and it's part of our destiny. I suppose you could say it's almost like, I don't know, and I'm not going to use the word karma, but we have a place to be all the time, and that place can change, and it's how our life unfolds. And when you become aware, and I think you can become aware, you will see that absolutely something needs to be done, and you need to be somewhere. And when you're in the right place, you can make a big difference. You can really help. Now, that Venus quincunx Jupiter is dangerous because you might not get it. You might be aware that there's something that needs to be done, Venus quincunx Jupiter, but you might make a mistake. You might go to where it's easy. There might be an option that seems to be easy. You do something, oh, I know what I'm supposed to do. I'll do that. It's easy. But if it's easy, really easy, and it's right in front of you, then that's a hint that it's just too easy, and you're going to the wrong place. And if you arrive at the right place, that probably requires a bit of effort and a bit of mental pain, because it's Venus quincunx Chiron, and there are perhaps going to be many false choices which shouldn't be considered. Okay, you consider them for a bit, but you don't need to get involved in them. It's a waste of your time, and it's not the right thing to be doing. But there's only one thing that you're supposed to be doing today. And I think that all links with that sextile between Jupiter and Chiron. It's asking you to use what you've got, to use your gifts in an appropriate way, and not to waste your gifts. And you can see that today there is just one place in which you should be using those gifts. Only one place. It's not several places. And in a way, a little bit of difficulty is a sign that you are going in the right direction. Okay, if it's totally difficult, then that's a different matter. But if something is too easy, it's a warning sign that you've got it wrong. So that's probably the main thing going on. This Venus quincunx Jupiter. Now, if Venus quincunx Jupiter, if you're completely misunderstanding Venus quincunx Jupiter, what could happen is that you just totally misuse the energies of Venus quincunx Jupiter and start indulging yourself, or spending money on things that it's just completely unnecessary, or just wasting time on empty pleasures. There is that possibility. I'm not saying it's going to. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just saying that there is some possibility of that. Now, moving to sort of a more mundane level, the moon is in Capricorn and it is opposition Mars, and that moon opposition Mars could have an impact on you, and it could be quite mundane. Moon in Capricorn can be about money, especially in a Sagittarian chart, and with moon opposition Mars, that might simply represent an argument about money, or it could be agitation about money, or about something material. Who owns what? It's my stuff, it's yours, not my stuff, that kind of thing. And there may be a certain possessiveness about moon opposition Mars. It may be someone else being possessive, it might be you being possessive. And as soon as you start straying into the financial area, I mean, it may be that you just don't touch money, and money is not important today, in which case that's fine. You can focus on the quincunx, but the quincunx between Venus and Jupiter and Venus and Chiron, that might actually be more useful. But still, there is a sense in which money could lead to unpleasantness. And so if you do start getting involved with anything financial today, just be aware that this is not necessarily an easy area. It may be an area where you can accomplish things, where you can resolve things, but I don't think it's easy. And if you're talking to other people about money, I think there is the possibility of some kind of disagreement, and perhaps even quite a serious disagreement. Capricorn, the moon continues to move through your sign, and I think in some respects that's a good thing, because you feel a certain oneness with what is going on, and you feel a sense also of being fairly grounded, and you certainly understand your priorities, and you're aware also perhaps that it's the first quarter moon. And with the first quarter moon, we had a new moon on October the 2nd, and the moon has been getting bigger, and now the moon is square the sun. And I think for you, this first quarter moon is probably quite useful. It's about you starting to see results. Perhaps something started at the beginning of the month and you weren't quite sure where it was going, but now the results are starting to come in, and you can start to see whether it's working or whether it's perhaps not working. And that does allow you perhaps to make a few adjustments. Some people find squares rather difficult, square between the moon and the sun. I don't think in your case you do find it difficult. You understand that nothing is perfect, that there's always a process of correction. And I think that today you can certainly make those corrections. And in the process, Capricorn, I think that people will listen to you, and your preparations are going to be good. You'll just give the impression of being well prepared. You're not going to run out of things to say. You're not going to have no ideas. You're not going to be unfamiliar with anything. At least if anything is relevant, you're familiar with the things that matter. And so, because you're well prepared, you're going to be impressive. And I think in most cases, people are going to listen to you. Though there is an opposition between the Moon and Mars. And I think the vast majority of people are going to respect you and take you seriously and listen to what you've got to say, but not everyone. I think Moon opposition Mars, you may feel that there is resistance in some quarters. So some people don't fully understand what you're saying. They don't fully appreciate your message. They might have questions about what you're doing. They might think you haven't, it might suggest you haven't got it right. And it's perhaps a situation where there could be a sense of conflict. And you perhaps have to ask yourself how you're going to respond. And it's just important to be honest. It may well be that you have made a couple of mistakes. Yeah, even Capricorns make mistakes. But you may have made a couple of mistakes. Maybe someone is pointing it out to you. Maybe you don't appreciate having these mistakes pointed out to you. But if you're honest, you'll take the criticism in your stride, and you'll say, well, that's just useful, and it helps you. It helps you be even more successful and even more competent. So don't allow yourself to get annoyed by other people's antics. Though, as far as relationships are concerned, that Moon-Mars opposition could be a bit difficult, and I think that you may be aware that you and certain people just simply don't get on with each other, or just don't see eye to eye. Now, it may just be a temporary situation, but it does seem that there are some people who are actually very stubborn. Maybe they're important people to you, but they do seem stubborn and very fixed in their ways, and dealing with them could be hard work. But I think it's actually possible, because the Moon is not just making an opposition to Mars, it's also making a sextile to Saturn. And so Moon sextile Saturn may allow you to accept the differences between you and other people and find a way around them. And disagreements are fine, disagreements are healthy, but arguments are not necessarily healthy at all. But that Moon sextile Saturn may give you, not just you discipline, but may actually give the other person discipline and a sense of responsibility. And if a relationship has a purpose, then any conflict, any disagreement should be secondary, and it's a purpose that counts. And I think if you can just keep in mind the purpose of the people around you, what their role is. I'm not just talking about any financial purpose. It can be an emotional purpose, a spiritual purpose, whatever that purpose is. If you can keep that purpose in mind, then I think, whatever difficulties there might be, I think you'll be able to overcome them. Aquarius, it, in some respects, is an interesting day. It's an interesting day for a lot of people because there are some interesting challenges, and I think that the interesting challenge, that can be conceptualized as this quincunx between Venus and Jupiter on one hand and Venus and Chiron on the other. And yeah, a lot of people are going to be influenced by this configuration involving Venus, Jupiter and Chiron. Now, as far as you're concerned, I think that this aspect could have an impact on you. I don't think it's going to have an impact on you necessarily in a direct way, but it may be about how you perceive your future, or at least how you perceive your future direction. As an Aquarius, I'm sure you've got ideas about the future. You've got ideas about where you're supposed to be going. I'm sure you've got ideas about this. And with this Venus quincunx Jupiter, Venus quincunx Chiron, you may be starting to think about the morality of what you're doing. you're thinking about what your plans are for the next 5 years. Those plans, I don't know, could be 5 years, could be 1 year, could be next week. But what your plans for the future are, and obviously I assume you're thinking about whether or not those plans are in accordance with yourself and who you are. But you also have to think about what your role is on this earth. What were you put on this earth for? And so this aspect involving Venus, this Venus-Jupiter Chiron configuration, is challenging. And I think it perhaps challenges you to think about, are you doing anything that is useful for maybe the rest of humanity? Because we've all, I suppose, been put here for a purpose, and it's not just all about ourselves. I mean, I suppose from a sort of Buddhist perspective, I suppose we think about we're supposed to evolve, and I suppose we're all, but I suppose if I've got this right, we're all supposed to become part of the creative process. And it's not just about our salvation; it's about the salvation of the entire universe. I think almost the entire creation's salvation. And if there's something wrong somewhere else, then there's something wrong with us. And so perhaps Aquarius, you have to think about the whole creation. I'm not saying, obviously we're not talking about nirvana anytime soon, but I suppose we have to sort of try to move in that direction, and if we possibly can, assuming we're a Buddhist. And so with Venus making for example, with quincunx to Jupiter, it's challenging you. It's challenging you to do something, or rather to take what you've been given and to be using it in a way that firstly benefits yourself, but then is able to benefit humanity. And that's why the Chiron comes in. And you shouldn't be afraid of being different. And for example, if you're having to deal with other people, perhaps in an organizational setting, it is a time perhaps to be a little bit of a maverick, to ask questions that people don't ask because they're not supposed to ask. But you're an Aquarius. You should be familiar with making connections that just other people can't see. And so perhaps it is a time for asking questions that other people just don't want to consider, and thinking outside the box. You might run a risk of appearing to be somewhat weird, but sometimes it's just necessary, and it's just something that has to be done. Though I'm not saying that you have to necessarily make an exhibition of yourself today. I mean, the moon is moving through Capricorn. It is, not in Aquarius yet, and it just might be a time instead, Aquarius, where you just have to consider all of this, consider what you're here for, and how you can make things better, and most importantly, what you are supposed to be doing. And you don't want to get, for example, tied up in administrative red tape, or just be totally focused on mundane tasks which are meaningless, and that actually could annoy you. So in fact, today, if you are involved in something routine and quite mundane, you just have to do, for some reason it just may make you feel more annoyed than usual. And perhaps this is just a reminder that the task maybe it has to be done, but it's perhaps a reminder that there's something else of a higher level that is perhaps waiting for you. Pisces, we have quite an interesting configuration involving Venus, Jupiter, and Chiron, and of course Jupiter is your ruler, so we do have to pay some attention to this. So Jupiter is sextile Chiron, and it's pretty exact. And Jupiter has just gone stationary retrograde, and it's gone stationary retrograde sextile Chiron. I should have probably mentioned that yesterday. And so with Jupiter sextile Chiron, you are perhaps starting to feel that it's not just about you, and that there is something that you are just meant to be doing. And there may even be a certain sense of detachment. Yeah, you understand, the moon's in Capricorn, that's quite a materialistic placement for the moon. And so Pisces, you might be thinking about material matters and what's good for you, what you need to do, but there's something else going on. And it may manifest as perhaps a certain sense of dissatisfaction, that it's just not quite good enough. And with Jupiter sextile Chiron, I think that you are being asked to consider, who you are, and also what makes you different. And sometimes, in order to really be of use to society, we do actually have to ask ourselves what makes us different. Because because there's no point in just helping. I mean, okay, it can be nice to just help, and I suppose, but we can all help in different ways, and we need to help in ways that are concordant with who we are. And perhaps this is what you need to consider with Jupiter sextile Chiron. You have to think carefully about what makes you different and what makes you special, because you think about what makes you special, and when you understand what makes you special, then you have to kind of give away that specialness, because that specialness is there to be of service to everyone else. So do understand what that special role is, and I think that may be what that Jupiter sextile Chiron is about. And sometimes, in order to be different, in order to manifest what's special, we have to risk being criticized, because Chiron can be the maverick. Doesn't do things the way other people want it to do, but in order to help other people, sometimes we just have to be different, and that's something that isn't always appreciated. Now, Venus is quincunx Jupiter, it's quincunx Chiron. Venus is on the Chiron Jupiter midpoint, and I think that maybe it's a reminder that in order to really make the most of who you are, you may just need some kind of broad underlying philosophy, the kind of philosophy or set of principles that maybe you can't fully work out on your own, and maybe you need some help. Maybe it's a time when you need to talk with like-minded people. You haven't got all the answers on your own, and by talking with like-minded people, you can really start to understand perhaps what your purpose is all about. And I should say, Pisces, at the moment, we've got this Venus trine Mars. That Venus trine Mars is still in operation. I think that Venus trine Mars does actually make you very charismatic, as I've said before. And there are other reasons to think that you are an appealing person, and that helps. It helps you. It helps you do whatever you want to do in terms of your own selfish interests, but it also helps you in terms of understanding, what your role is, and it helps you ingratiate yourself and get close to people who are just on your wavelength. And I think that when you're with people who are on your philosophical and perhaps ideological wavelength, you might really feel a sense of oneness and perhaps a sense of purpose as well. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And I'm now going to look at today from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Thursday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 3, difficulty at the beginning. So in some respects, this hexagram is pretty self-explanatory. So at the beginning, things are not easy, and we might feel that we need outside help. And at first, whatever we're trying to do, whatever we're trying to achieve, it does take a long time. And I do think that we need to be patient. And certainly to begin with, we just need to just pause. We just need to wait for the situation to resolve, or at least start to resolve. And also we need to be open-minded, because we might have to ask, for example, who are our friends? What can be helpful? Now, it may be that something or somebody we regard as being completely negative. We might regard someone, for example, as being an enemy, someone who could really hurt us, perhaps, or, not hurt, but someone who could really undermine us. We might have these conceptions, but then it might be that we realize later that actually they could be very useful. So someone who seems to be an enemy could actually be a friend. So just because we start the day mistrusting someone doesn't mean that they can't be useful. Now, some people should be mistrusted, and we shouldn't just be trusting for the sake of it. But still, we need to take things slowly. And the question is, can we really make much progress without help? And it may be that we need to seek out assistance. That on our own, there may just be limits to what we can achieve, and we plow on. And there's always this question about whether or not we've got enough resources, and that is a big question. And it may be that we have all the resources we need, and it's going to be fine. If we're rich in resources, it's okay, no need to worry. If we're not rich in resources, if we feel that we just simply don't have what it takes, then we have to be patient. We have to wait. And I think that is a sense of difficulty at the beginning. Now, there are 3 moving lines. So this difficulty at the beginning does move. And it moves to hexagram number 11, which is peace. Now, this is a really very good hexagram, and it does indicate that whatever difficulties we perhaps start the day with, there's going to be a resolution, but things are going to start moving, and movement is quite important with this hexagram. Everything is in the right place here. You can see that it's looking balanced. We've got 3 unbroken lines at the bottom, and we've got 3 broken lines at the top. So if you like, if you take this bottom trigram of 3 unbroken lines as being like heaven, and you take the 3 broken, the 3 broken lines as being sort of a receptive, as being sort of bit more earthy. I know that's not an earthy trigram, but there's a sort of a comparison between the 2 trigrams. But everything is in the right place, and heaven is below, and we're above, and so everything is flowing. And so if things seem really difficult at the beginning of the day, and there's things bothering you, just don't panic. Just let things move, let things take their course, and don't be in a rush. If you haven't got resources to do something, just wait it out and wait till the resources turn up. But in the end, things are going to move. So I do think that today is going to end on a much more fortunate note than how it begins. So yeah, overall, things are improving. But don't be in too much of a rush. To begin with, it just may be a bit difficult, but don't worry. I do think that in the end, things will start moving. Now, I want to consider the presidential election on November the 5th. And I understand it, I've sort of gone on and on about it, but I want to look at it from a slightly different note. And that's why I've got this picture of Obama with reactions. Obama, it's not because I'm really going to talk only about Obama. It's just that this election is going to affect all sorts of different people. And rather than just look at just look at Kamala Harris's chart or Donald Trump's chart, we have to look at many people's charts. How are they going to be impacted? And certainly there's a possibility that Obama has a big stake in this election. I mean, it's often been said that he has a lot of control, he has a lot of influence, and the suggestion that he had a big influence on Biden standing down in terms of not looking for re-election. And so maybe by looking at how other people respond to the election, by comparing their chart with the November the 5th chart, we just may get a few hints about how the election is actually going to turn out. But as I said, I must emphasize, I do think that Trump is going to win. But of course, I suppose something could happen to him. I mean, I can't guarantee that he won't get shot or die in his bed or whatever. But assuming he's alive and well by the time of the election, I do expect him to win. But let's just look at some people, and I suppose I will start by considering Barack Obama. And so here is Barack Obama's natal chart. And, I've been thinking about Barack Obama's chart and, what's going on for him, because he had this incredible solar return. Let me show you Barack Obama's solar return. So this was his birthday for August the 4th, 2024. His solar return is exactly on a new moon, and there's that new moon, really, really close. And if solar returns mean anything, this must indicate that it is a very important year for Barack Obama. I mean, I understand he's having a higher profile. You see Barack Obama on sort of YouTube ads trying to get you to contribute money to the to his friend Kamala, as I think he puts it, and so he certainly has a higher profile. Now, in terms of this chart, Uranus is exactly rising. The Uranus is on Algol, fairly close to Algol, on the ascendant. That's a very difficult Uranus rising. So you do get a certain sense of a shock there with Uranus rising, but new moon on the IC, that's possibly sort of more neutral. Certainly represents some new beginning. And with Barack Obama, one might also want to consider his lunar return immediately before the election. So let's go further in. There's his lunar return. Lunar return. He's got Jupiter on the IC, which is nice, but he's got Saturn on the ascendant. So this is his lunar return. By the way, with my returns, I always set my returns for the place of birth. I don't go for the place someone is living. That's the way I do my returns. I mean, I know we can have arguments about that or discussion about that. I think that returns can work for the place you're living, but I think that the important things, I do think the place of birth is more important. And certainly that was the traditional way of doing it. I think it was in the 17th century, there was a book by Gadbury talking about the returns, I think, of Charles I, and he would use the place of birth rather than the place someone was. But Barack Obama, yeah, he has Saturn rising, and I think that Saturn rising, that might be a cause for concern, although there is Jupiter on the IC, but it's retrograde, it's peregrine, so maybe not. So that Jupiter return is certainly telling us something. Then there is Barack Obama's solar arc directions for his solar arc directions set for the moment let's just go back to Barack Obama's chart. So basically Barack Obama is what, he's 60, he's just turned 63. So this is where we move everything 63 degrees. So these are his solar arc directions, and so I just want to compare his solar arc directions with his natal chart. So in a wheel we've got Barack Obama's natal chart. On the outer wheel we've got his solar arc directions. Now, what I found quite interesting is his solar arc directed midheaven. His solar arc directed midheaven has just gone into Aquarius, and it is applying to a conjunction of his Jupiter. So solar arc directed midheaven applying to Jupiter is actually quite fortunate. Is quite fortunate, and I suppose looked at in isolation, you could say this might be the hint of good news for Barack Obama. So there is some indication there that something fortunate is happening with his progressed midheaven moving on to his Jupiter, and at the time of the election it will be pretty close, it will be applying, and the midheaven will be opposition his Mercury, though. But the main thing is it is opposition his Jupiter. I felt I had to point that out because I wanted to give a balanced view. That it's not all looking difficult for Obama with that midheaven applying to a conjunction of Jupiter. So I've gone into Barack Obama's chart in a little more detail than some of the other people I'm going to be looking at. But then we have the question: what transits does Barack Obama have on the day of the election? So I've gone for the evening of the election. So here's Barack Obama's chart. Now, what I think is really important about the presidential election is Mars. Mars is just moving into Leo, and I think this tells us so much about what kind of day it's going to be like. As you see, there's Barack Obama's Jupiter. Remember, his progressed midheaven is going to be conjunct his Jupiter, but Mars is going to be at 0 degrees 39 Leo. And 0 degrees 39 Leo is opposition his Jupiter. So that is quite a strong aspect. And Mars is going to be opposition his progressed midheaven. And so I would have said you might regard that as being something quite difficult. And remember, it's not just Mars. We've got at the time of the election, we've got Mars opposition. We've got a Mars-Pluto opposition right on his Jupiter. And so that I think is going to shake things up. And so if you look at everything combined, he's got a solar return with Uranus rising on conjunct Algol. He's got a lunar return just before the election with Saturn on the ascendant, and then we've got this Mars causing a fair amount of irritation here. Now, as far as the progressed midheaven conjunct his Jupiter, it's applying. Now, that may say something about what he's doing. Okay, let's say Trump gets elected. What is Obama going to be doing? Maybe this is when Obama comes into his own. Maybe he is, I don't know, leader of a resistance, perhaps. But I think in terms of what he's doing, it probably is going to be a very challenging time for Obama, but it may be quite a good time for Obama. I think actually if Trump were to win, I think Obama might actually quite come into his own. I think in a kind of a weird way, he might actually benefit from Trump winning in terms of his reputation, and also remembering that his solar return had a new moon. This is a new beginning for Obama. Whether it's as being the person controlling America, I mean, I'm not saying that's an exaggeration, but clearly if Kamala Harris becomes elected president, she's not going to be in control. I mean, it's someone else who is behind her, and I suppose you could say, well, obviously it's Obama and others are going to be running the show. There's no way that Kamala Harris is going to be in effective control of the US. So that's one way you could see Jupiter on his progress midheaven on his Jupiter. But another way is Trump winning and the Democratic Party having to rebuild themselves, and perhaps Obama playing a central role in that. So that is Barack Obama's chart. Now, this Mars, it just keeps coming up, and I do want to talk more about this Mars. Now, so Mars actually goes into Leo, I think it's on November the 3rd. So here's a chart of Mars moving into Leo, sort of set for Washington. So it actually goes into Leo on November the 3rd, 2024. And there you can see Mars at 0 degrees Leo. And it's really close. And one thing about this Mars in Leo, I've said this before, the moment Mars goes into Leo, it forms a mutual reception with the Sun. So Mars is very strong in Leo, and the Sun in Scorpio, which is really invigorated by that mutual reception. Because Sun is in Scorpio, the sign of Mars, a sign ruled by Mars. Mars is in Leo, sign ruled by the Sun. They're in mutual reception, and my interpretation of that is that the Sun and Mars are male planets, and it benefits a male candidate. I mean, that's how I see it, and I think that this Mars moving into Leo is a big plus for Trump, and I think it's one small piece of evidence that Trump is going to win. But there are other people who are going to be impacted by Mars moving into Leo. One person I have already mentioned is Allan Lichtman. Allan Lichtman is the man with the 13 keys, who is predicting using his 13 keys. I think he's a historian or some academic, and he's predicting, he's all over the place, but he's predicting that the Democrats are going to win on the basis of his 13 keys. And the only thing I want to say about his chart is that he has Saturn at 1 degree 57 Leo. So what that means is that Mars is going to be conjunct his Saturn at the time of this election. I mean, he's put his reputation on the line. Well, we're all putting our reputation on the line. I'm putting my reputation on the line, kind of, but I don't quite have the same reputation to protect as Allan Lichtman. But Mars conjunct his Saturn is quite a frustrating time for him. Perhaps a kind of frustration you feel when you've made a prediction and you've got it wrong. But maybe I'll soon be eating my own words, because if you look at my chart, I've got Mars, my Mars, this is me, I've got Mars at 0 degrees 50 Taurus. So Mars is squaring my Mars. So it's quite a difficult time for me. I'm going to be accident prone. If I go off air, you'll know that something bad has happened, and then Mars is going to be squaring my ascendant. But okay, I've got a bit of time to wait for that anyway. So that's me. Elon Musk has just said that I think he was joking, but Elon Musk has said that if Kamala wins, he could end up in prison. I do think he's exaggerating, but here's Elon Musk's horoscope, and we'll put the positions of the planets on election day around. So Elon Musk has got Venus at 1924 Gemini. So Jupiter is moving retrograde, but Jupiter is moving retrograde onto his Venus. I would have said, that is probably quite fortunate. So over the next, few weeks following the election, in some respects, he's going to feel quite good about himself, perhaps. And Elon Musk he's got 13 degrees 30 Cancer rising. And so with 13 degrees 30 Cancer rising, you can see that the sun is trine but 13, he's actually got the degree of America's sun. The sun on July the 4th, 1776, the sun was at 13 Cancer, and so Elon Musk has got 13 Cancer rising. So the sun is going to be trine that. So I would have said it looks looks like a pretty good time for Elon Musk. It's not enough to say that you can't just look at Elon Musk's chart and say, well, Trump's going to win because of Elon Musk's chart, but it doesn't look as if he's going to be too miserable at the time of the election. Of course, there may be other things going on in his life. So I think I've gone on for quite some time. I would like to look at some more people, but I'm going to have to sort of cut this a little bit short. So what about Taylor Swift? Taylor Swift has of course endorsed Kamala Harris, and so how's she going to be feeling at the time of the election? Well, I suppose Venus is going to be quite close to her sun, and that's true. I don't know if there's much else going on. I don't think that's the trouble with Taylor Swift is we don't have a time of birth for her. She does have Jupiter. Jupiter will be at 20 Gemini. So roughly at the time she's got Jupiter opposition her sun at the moment. I mean, that's likely to work in many different ways. Of course, there's a Jupiter Venus opposition at the time of the election, and that Jupiter-Venus opposition does pick up on her sun. So you could say, well, the Jupiter-Venus midpoint is conjunct Taylor Swift's sun at the time of the election. So, well, you could say that she seems to be relatively happy. But maybe that's, I suppose you could say, well, she's happy because Kamala's won, but maybe she'll be happy because of something else. I suppose that is possible. Now, another person who's really interested in the election result is Volodymyr Zelensky. Now, here's Volodymyr Zelensky's horoscope. And we already know that Volodymyr Zelensky has Jupiter just crossing his ascendant, and we can look at this in several ways. It's interesting that, someone pointed out on my comments, because I talked about Volodymyr Zelensky, and I should have mentioned that because Volodymyr Zelensky has Jupiter in Gemini retrograde, and of course Jupiter is now in Gemini retrograde, and so he has Jupiter crossing his ascendant, and Jupiter will have just passed his ascendant. So you might say Jupiter crossing the ascendant, it's good times for Volodymyr. On the other hand, is that really going to be that useful? Jupiter is in its detriment, so I have my doubts about that. But it's the Mars that I find interesting. Volodymyr Zelensky has his Mars at 0 degrees 15 Leo. So he's got his Mars return at the time of the election. And I do kind of think that is somewhat spectacular. And, Mars, having made it the square to Mars, having made that return, will move towards the opposition of his Sun and Venus. So from a Mars perspective, this could be quite a difficult time for Volodymyr Zelensky. So maybe his Mars return is about the irritation, annoyance, or even disturbance, perhaps, that Donald Trump has won. That's one way of interpreting it. And it's supposedly it's going to have an impact on Ukraine. Now, by the way, Donald Trump's opponents are saying, oh, well, he's going to let Russians take over Ukraine, whatever. I suspect that when Donald Trump becomes president, I doubt American policy towards Ukraine is going to change much. That's my view. Whatever J.D. Vance says about Ukraine and his skepticism about American support, I wonder if it's going to actually make that much difference. So if you look at the chart here's the chart of Ukraine. So Ukraine has actually got its Saturn at 1 degree 31 Aquarius. And so that means that Volodymyr Zelensky's Mars is opposition the Saturn of the country he rules. And one has to wonder whether Volodymyr Zelensky is really such a good thing for his country. I think in the end, they chose quite a destructive president. And, don't forget that Volodymyr Zelensky has the Aries point aspecting his Mars-Saturn midpoint. Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint can be associated with someone who is involved in a lot of casualties. And I think that that says something about the country he's ruling. It has not been a fortunate presidency. I mean, I know that people regard Zelensky in some quarters as a hero, but it's not really working out. And I think as a leader, it really is starting to go pear-shaped. But Mars is going to be opposition Ukraine-Saturn. Mars is going to be conjunct Volodymyr Zelensky's own Mars. So I suspect for Zelensky and Mars, it's not going to be great. Also, Ukraine has its Sun at 0 degrees Virgo. So Mars is going to be making a semi-sextile to Ukraine's Sun, which I think might be a bit of a problem. And finally, I want to look at the European Union. I don't see anything direct about the day of the election, but just a reminder, broadly at this time, the European Union has a Mars-Pluto conjunction in Scorpio, and in fact it's square Saturn. And just a reminder that Uranus is retrograde. Uranus is retrograding towards the opposition of that Mars-Pluto conjunction. So I do think that is quite a difficult time for the European Union. Okay, maybe that November the 5th itself isn't particularly special, but it just gives a backdrop for the broad time in which the European Union is existing. And I don't think it looks particularly good for the European Union over the next few months, and we'll have to see what happens. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say for today. Sorry if it was all a little bit confused, moving from one chart to another chart. I just thought it'd be interesting to look at how different people and different organizations might be impacted by what was going on at the time of the presidential election. So thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. And if you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for watching, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.